got some big-time news we're going to be diving into on today's edition of Vikings Now by Chat Sports. My name is Patrick Siepman, and welcome in. So we're going to be starting off with the latest going on with Brian Flores and all of the latest interviews that he is having for head coaching jobs, and then also some big-time NFC North news that I do want to talk about on the second half of today's show. But let's start off here with Brian Flores. Adam Schefter tweeting this out this morning. Which is a positive update for Vikings fans. But he did mention that the Steelers are interviewing Vikings DC Brian Flores today for their head coaching job and former Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy on Wednesday. But then he has this note. Minnesota has been pushing to bring back Flores, and if he doesn't land a head coaching job, would have a good chance at retaining him. So, as we know right now, Flores has two interviews. The Baltimore Ravens, he already completed that, and then the Pittsburgh Steelers probably going on as we are currently filming this show. So there's a lot to break down here because I think that Flores, even though he was high up on the Raiders list originally, high up on the Ravens and Steelers list, as it's starting to unfold and all these other head coaching positions are being filled, it's actually looking like Flores has a good chance to remain as the DC for the Minnesota Vikings. But before we dive into it, if you guys could help us reach our next milestone here on YouTube, and that being 69,500 subscribers. We post multiple videos per day. We actually have a Jordan Addison update coming out later on today, so stay tuned for that. But we got 24/7 coverage around your favorite football team. We get breaking news any time of the week, any time of the day. I got a video for you guys ASAP. So help us reach that next milestone. Just need 339 more of you guys to hit that subscribe button. All right, so let's look here at the latest NFL head coach tracker. So the Dolphins actually end up hiring Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, which we'll talk more about on the second half of today's show and why that's good news for Vikings fans. But then the Falcons actually ended up hiring former Vikings offensive coordinator, former Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski. The Giants ended up landing their big fish, that being John Harbaugh. And the Titans actually made a pretty good signing, getting Robert Saleh to be their next head coach. But that leaves the Bills, Steelers, Ravens, Browns, Cardinals, and Raiders all still having head coach openings. And I do really agree with what Schefter said here and him making the point that if the Vikings, or that if Flores does not get the Steelers or Ravens job, they would have a pretty good chance at keeping him as the DC. I still think him taking these defensive coordinator interviews with the Washington Commanders, that's the only one that's been reported so far, but potentially the Cowboys reaching out. I still think Flores, if he doesn't get a head coaching job, he will be back as the DC for the Minnesota Vikings. This is a leverage play by his agent. They want to get the most money out of the Wilfs, and I will say, if the Wilfs aren't able to pay up, and they aren't willing to pay up to maybe a $7 million per year contract for Brian Flores, that's a joke. That's on them. That's telling the fan base that they aren't serious about winning football games, but it's looking like right now that Flores, this changes every day, but I'd probably say 50-50 here if he remains as the DC for the Minnesota Vikings. Let's just take a look here at the latest odds for each of the two teams that that Brian Flores will be interviewing with, and first off being the Steelers. So right now, Chris Shula, Rams defensive coordinator, is the favorite, but Brian Flores right behind him at plus 250. Then you got Mike McCarthy plus 600 as he's interviewing with Pittsburgh tomorrow. Then you got Sean McDermott, outside option. Then you also got Anthony Weaver for Pittsburgh at plus 900. But now the Ravens head coaching odds, it's changed a whole lot. Like Flores was originally around plus 200, plus 250 for this job, but now Jesse Minter is the favorite at minus 200. Then you got Clint Kubiak, Seahawks offensive coordinator, at plus 200. Sean McDermott plus 800, and Flores is actually 12-1 right now. So if we're just playing the odds, really the Steelers are the only team that has a good chance of landing him. I still think he has a good chance of landing that job. I mean, if I'm Pittsburgh, Flores has familiarity with that organization. A lot of those guys that he was coaching with back in 2022 are still on this football team, so I still think the Steelers could have a good chance of hiring Flores. But if they don't, I think it's looking like Flores will remain as the DC for the Minnesota Vikings. But also some big-time news here. Shout out to JJ McCarthy. It is his birthday, turning 23 years old. So if you guys want to show JJ McCarthy some love, give me those nines down below in the comment section. It's also looking like he'll be QB1 for Minnesota next season. So hopefully he can have a better year than he had this past year. But if you guys want to wish JJ McCarthy a happy birthday, just give me those nines down below. Now, I do want to give a massive shout-out to today's sponsor, that being PrizePicks. And the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than PrizePicks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close the season out right with PrizePicks by getting $50 instantly in lineups after you put your first $5 lineup. Now, PrizePicks, they got a brand new feature called the Community tab, where you guys can find your community on PrizePicks, and with the new social feeds feature, you can share PrizePicks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like, use them as inspiration for your own picks. You can even follow PrizePicks partners like us and tail or fade our picks with just one click. They also have now early payouts, so if your player gets off to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. So download the PrizePicks app today. Plug in promo code CLNS. Will hook you guys up with $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. But a massive shout out to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's show. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, I think we got some great news in the NFC North for Vikings fans here. Started off with the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions did not end up going with Mike McDaniel as their offensive coordinator, which I will say, if the Lions were somehow to land Mike McDaniel, former Dolphins head coach, I think that would be a disaster for Vikings fans because all that speed you have in Detroit with Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, the whole plethora of weapons they have over there with a very good quarterback in Jared Goff, I think that would have been a home run hire. But they didn't do that. They ended up hiring Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, which, I mean, if you have any Cardinals fans in your life, ask them what they think about Drew Petzing calling the plays for Arizona over the last couple of years. They can't stand this guy. So I think the Vikings fans possibly dodged a bullet there with Mike McDaniel not being the next Lions offensive coordinator. Now, Packers also getting worse this offseason. Jeff Hafley shot up to Miami for taking him away from Green Bay, but he ended up getting that job. There's a huge Green Bay connection here, and it's also looking like probably that the Dolphins will make a strong push for Malik Willis during NFL free agency. But I will say, pretty good hire by the Miami Dolphins. Even though I don't think this is like a home run, celebration type of hire for Miami, but Jeff Hafley has done a great job as a Packers DC. Now, also I want to play devil's advocate. This guy went 0-5 once Micah Parsons got hurt, but it's just so funny that a guy like Jeff Hafley, where I think he is a really good defensive coordinator, but I think a guy like Flores is great, and the fact that he's getting a head coaching job, we'll see. I mean, this guy has to just blow people away during these interviews here. But Jeff Hafley, Packers DC, going to Miami, which leaves the Packers with an opening at their defensive coordinator position. And actually, Vikings DB's coach and pass game coordinator, Daronte Jones, is set to get an interview there. Now, Jones also interviewed already in person with the Cowboys, as well with the Jets, and also the Giants have requested Daronte Jones as well. I think Daronte Jones is going to be a hot hire to be the next DC for whatever team he is. And, if the Vikings do bring back Flores, I think it's more likely than not that Daronte Jones is out the door because he's probably going to want to call plays at some point in his NFL career, and it's looking like he's got a great opportunity to do so during this cycle. But with all that being said, the NFC North feels wide open heading into next season. Now, normally the NFC North is pretty wide open, but with the Bears having a really special season, I think there's still going to be a problem, and Caleb Williams is taking steps right before our own very eyes, and I still think he's going to be a very, very good quarterback, and Ben Johnson, a very, very good head coach. But now, with the Packers losing Hafley, with the Lions not being able to land Mike McDaniel, and the Vikings, if they are able to keep Brian Flores and keep this whole coaching staff together, they have a good chance to win the division next season. And I promise you, nobody's going to pick the Vikings next season. When we are in, June, July, and everybody's making their predictions on who they think is going to win the division, nobody's going to be picking the Vikings because of the quarterback spot. So it's really going to come down to next season. Can JJ McCarthy, can he take those next steps? Can he finally become the guy we thought he was going to be coming out of Michigan? If he can, the Vikings got a strong chance to win that NFC North, and I still think this Vikings defense just raises the floor of this football team a whole lot when we're looking at the rest of this division. And I'm like, the Vikings defense might be the best unit in this entire division. The NFC North, even though the season was a disaster, looks wide open heading into the next season. Now, also some more great news for Vikings fans. Chris Cupper will be seen. The Vikings are going to move on from him. His contract did expire, and he was original member of Kevin O'Connell's staff back in 2022. So that's one significant change. Not a surprising move, kind of like Kevin Seifert says, as we all thought this was going to be the case, especially if we're seeing guys like Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram, even an Ezra Cleveland leave the Vikings organization at the offensive line spot and play much better football than they did in Minnesota. So that's good news for Vikings fans. I know all of us wanted him, to get out the door. But if you guys made it to the end of today's show, appreciate all of you guys for watching. Big time Jordan Addison update coming out later today. It feels good to be back in the studio, and appreciate all of you guys for watching. As always, let's go Vikes.